Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming to this master panel session for, can't hear me? My mic's on, but, all right, is that better? Yeah? All right, sorry about that. So again, welcome to this master panel session at the National E-Extension Conference and National Extension Directors and Administrators meeting. Really great to have you here and really great to have our panelists. I'm going to give them very short introductions. First and last name is what you're going to get because we're going to save a lot of time for questions, and you can find all the information online if you want to learn more about them. So to my right, far right, Harold Jarche, Dave Gray, Jane Hart, and Beth Kanter. Please give them a warm welcome. So we have a little experiment in controlled chaos or not controlled chaos going on. For those of you on this side of the room, you can see the presentation on the screen there. That's board thing, and that's where you can post your questions. And you can also, if you're listening on the Adobe Connect session, post your questions in the chat. We'll try and get all the online participants involved as much as we can. We need to get you involved as well here in the room, so there's a couple of microphones available in the aisles. If you have questions, please queue up. That's for you, Jane, queue up. Queue up and ask your questions. So we had a lot of great questions come in on board thing, and I thought this was an interesting one, maybe a head scratcher. And since I work with different kinds of organizations and corporations, I thought we'd start there, and that is, how do you instill a mission in an organization? And sorry, Beth, but you're right here.
I was afraid that you asked me to say that. Well, in social change organizations and nonprofits, usually the mission has been instilled in their mission, and usually in the founder and their passion. And so I think it comes down to leadership and
folks on workplace learning issues and getting that involved. How important is that sense of purpose or mission?
Well, I'd just like to say that the mission often comes top down, as we know, and people having to sort of put that into practice. And often that's perhaps a mission that they're not totally engaged with. So for my part, I think it's much more about helping them to have some bottom-up mission so they can collaboratively come up with a mission. I think that's the way some of the organizations I'm working with are thinking about it. Certainly in terms of workplace learning, how the learning relates to that mission, where they think they should be going forward, rather than necessarily implementing something that's happened top down.
Mm-hmm. Dave?
Yeah, how to instill a mission. I think first thing that comes to mind for me is that I believe that every organization has something that it wants to become. And it's not something that can be driven from the top down, and it's not even necessarily something that I think can be driven from the bottom up, it is a thing. Organizations are living things, really. They're made up of living things like us, and when you put enough of us together, you have, with some kind of a common purpose, then you have an organization. And to me, you're making a mistake if you're trying to make an organization become something that it doesn't want to become. And from a leadership perspective, it's about listening. It's really about listening not only to the people in the organization, but the customers and the partners or the stakeholders, trying to listen to the ecosystem and listen with an appreciation for this idea that this organization wants to become something. And so part of it is listening, but part of it is also reflecting back what you hear to the people in the organization. This is what I hear. This is what I think we want to be. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's my thought.
Well, I think I pretty well agree with everything that's been said here. So one thing I've noticed in terms of mission and setting it is that in larger organizations is that quite often the mission comes from the board or the senior executive, the C-level. And but what's actually happening down at the lowest level quite often isn't translated that way. So you get something like people are our assets, and we believe in our people, and then we lay off 20%. right? But we still believe in all of you, right? So I think that
The ones that are left.
exactly. So I think that, so whatever your mission is, and in most cases, the mission is probably, whatever was written up there is probably pretty good. You know, we are serving, you know, our students, our people, our universities and things like that. But the problem, I think, is in the execution, and that's in the translation through those multiple layers. And I think that's the thing. And with social media, is that there's no place to hide anymore. Is that if you are a dysfunctional organization, everybody outside knows it before you know it inside. So I think those are things that we have to look at now.
Steve, we have a question for the audience. Steve Judd.
I think traditionally we tie a lot of things together: leadership, authority, and responsibility, and in that gets bound up a lot of control. And yet I think when you guys talk about a connected organization and a learning flow, we're really talking about loosening up that control, or at least pushing that control out closer to the edges. Do you have, I guess you're a master panel, right? So recommendations for how you can take an organization that sort of has, throughout its history, been about layers of control, and start to dissolve those and push some of that out to the edges?
You can start. Go ahead.
I'll start and then roll back. Or?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. It's a question actually that I've been talking about with some of my other colleagues a lot, about how do you, okay, this is all great. Okay, the new organization's got to be transparent and it's got to be open. We've got to lose control and stuff like that. But how do you actually get started? And I think, and this is a, you know, it's a hypothesis, it's an idea out there, but it's one that I've been discussing a fair bit. And I think that the first step is narrating your work, or working out loud, or learning out loud, because that is the way in which everybody starts seeing what everybody else is doing. So the behavior of, you know, putting things out there, making it more transparent, and then and that's from the C-level all the way down, I think is an essential first step. And I'll let my master colleagues tell the rest.
Yeah, sure. I want to say two things. I think the messaging around giving up control is kind of scary. I think it's more about sharing control and shared leadership versus we're going to lose control. And I had an experience where I was embedded with in a philanthropic organization as a visiting scholar, and it was very sort of more traditional top-down type of organization, but with a desire to want to be more transparent. And so the opening steps were to take they wanted to take a small experiment of putting some materials out on a wiki, things like thought leadership papers, nothing confidential, not employee reviews, but things that were assets to their grantees and other people in the field could use. And it was described as, well, it's a transparent filing cabinet. And actually there's some value for us to do this because it'll reduce us having to answer emails at someone asking for that leadership paper. And so the mantra was, let's try it and see if anything bad happens. And that was at the beginning of the, and we have this meeting about what are all the bad things that could happen if we have this transparent filing cabinet. And we went through a list, I can't even remember them, and they were written down and we discussed them. Well, what would happen if that happened? And so then at the end of the project, after a few months, there was another meeting that said, well, did any of the bad things happen? Well, no. Well, what were some of the good things that happened? And then, okay, so you know what? Now we're ready to take the next step with this. Instead of just putting documents out there, maybe we're going to have some dialogue around the documents. You know, could anything bad happen? Oh, maybe there could be some negative comments. Well, how will we deal with that? And what actually is a negative comment? So sharing control and try something small with low risk and see if anything bad happens.
Yeah, go along with that. I think within a learning and development arena, there's I talk a lot about loosening control, giving up control, and I think with an L&D we've been very concerned about hanging on to control. But on the other hand, students or learners or whatever you like to call them within an organization often want us to tell them what to do. They want to be directed. There are some people who are very happy to be self-directed and go out and search the web and do everything that we'd like them to do, but there are others who still want to be told what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. So I think it's a very slow process of kind of weaning them off that reliance on us to spoon-feed them with everything and control everything and measure everything for them and help them become more sort of self-directed. So that means, I think, helping them with sort of programs that will give them some control and some autonomy in the whole process, not trying to do it all for them, and then gradually reassuring them they can do that, because a lot of them have lost the confidence to do things for themselves. So I think it's on both ends of the spectrum about the control thing.
I have one. Leaders never had control, just ever. It's been an illusion, always. The thing about control, I mean, less control is actually more control from a leadership perspective. And I know that sounds a little counterintuitive, but I want to explain why I say that. Think about something like anti-lock brakes on a car, right? It used to be, before anti-lock brakes, you'd have to pump the brakes. Your car goes into a spin, you have to pump the brakes, right? Technically, in those days, you had more control of the brakes, but you had actually less control of the car. Now that we have anti-lock brakes, you're not having to think about pumping the brakes, right? So you technically have less control of the brakes, but you have more control of the car. And it's just basic fundamental distribution of control to where it belongs. One of the most interesting things I've heard about in this context is when you think about how they organize an aircraft carrier. An aircraft carrier has a traditional chain of command and a hierarchical control system when everything's peaceful and when they're not in a war and when there's not a storm going on and when a plane isn't trying to land in the middle of a thunderstorm. But when the, whatever you want to say, hits the fan, the control morphs and the control goes to the people who are at the point where the decision needs to be made. So if you're on the flight deck and you have a better sense of the situation, you know what's going on, you have all the authority. You have more authority than the captain of the ship in that context, in that situation. I mean, the Navy even has rules about when to break rules. It's like, the rule is follow the rule unless it's stupid to follow the rule, basically. And I think this is an important thing for leaders to understand. Number one, the idea that you had control over things that you really weren't aware of and you really couldn't have conversations about is kind of an illusion. You have control over the controls, but those controls don't really control as much as you think. You have controls over the illusion of control, but you don't actually have control. And as you distribute control to the people who are at the point of where the decisions need to be made, and the better you can get at that, actually the more control you have over the organization as a whole, because you can focus on the things that as a leader you need to focus on, and you won't be distracted by pumping the brakes when you're in the spin and you're trying to control the vehicle. You can actually focus on things like the steering wheel and the dashboard and what's happening out there, and oh, there's a kitty cat that I don't want to hit or whatever, right? The end.
Again, questions from the audience. Please come up or share them
Bob,
on board thing. Oh,
Bob,
go ahead.
We have a few from Adobe Connect, some questions and comments. So Andrew says, a desire to be transparent doesn't always correlate with the culture of permission seeking. Isn't there a need to leaders to give up that need to give permission before people take risks?
No. Well, you've heard, it's easier to apologize than to ask permission, right? And I'm going to give you permission now to not ask permission.
All right.
It's interesting, Kevin Gamble at dinner last night, I don't know, Kevin's here somewhere, said that Extension has a culture of permission, and that often we don't do things unless we are given explicit permission. Nodding heads, shaking heads in the audience, some nodding heads. Prescriptions.
Well, we need permission. What we need is we need permission to have a culture of experimentation.
Right. Good.
Or to get rid of the. Okay. Sometimes in a long-standing culture, there are the ghosts, and it's the unspoken things. And I think you need to have Oprah come in and name it and claim it, and have a session where everybody is, acknowledging that, the culture of niceness. I'm thinking about an organization that I was working with. There was a culture of niceness. And so therefore the staff was afraid to comment on blogs because it would violate this culture of niceness rule. Well, where did that come from? Oh, that came 30 or 40 years ago. And well, is that actually a written down policy? Well, and so again, it's getting together and talking about it, naming it and claiming it, and then opening up the ability to do it. And then there again, I think leadership and social proofing is really important. Like, who are I always think about, social change. Who are the influencers inside this ecosystem that if they start behaving in that way, will influence others to get it started?
Yeah, it's not quite related to transparency, but I don't know if anyone's read the book by Ewan Semple called Organizations Don't Tweet, People Do. And he has a very interesting statement in that. He talks about return on investment. And I think in part of, we talk about transparency, I think about what Dave mentioned, experimentation, is that you have the acronym ROI, right, return on investment. Well, if the I is small enough, nobody really cares. So, and he has this term that comes from, I'm not sure who the other person is, about Trojan mice. You know about the Trojan horse. Well, we need to be getting lots of little Trojan mice out there. And little experiments that can, not even proof of concept, but let's just try this thing out and see how it works and does that. So experiment, be curious, try different kinds of things. And if you do that in a transparent way, then you can see what other people are doing. And I think that experimentation, as Dave mentioned, plus transparency, I think that can lead to a more resilient organization.
So can I piggyback on that? Someone in the chat said go beyond transparent to cooperative planning of the future with individuals. There are many like me who care, and someone piggybacked on that and said cooperative is the first step. Collaborative should be the aim, a shared aim and objective. This is rarely well defined.
Gene or Neil, do you want to talk about cooperative and collaborative?
I was really the expert on collaboration versus
No, it's just
cooperation.
it's something that's very important to me. There's a difference between cooperation and collaboration, as I and many others define it. And that in collaboration is working together for a common purpose. You have an objective, right? Teams collaborate. Cooperation is what you do in networks a lot of times, is that we all work, we all contribute, but there's no quid pro quo, there's no direct benefit of it, but we share something on YouTube, we share a bookmark, we say, hey, take a look at this, look at those kinds of things. And the thing is that the more and more of our work that is happening in networks, the more cooperation is the behavior that's going to make the organization stronger. Because all those cooperative behaviors are going to enhance serendipity. The more people who are sharing, the more people who are doing good things, it's good for everybody, and it's good for the person who cooperates. We're all bloggers, right? And you know how many views and LinkedIn friends that Beth has, which is more than me. But that's because Beth has exhibited cooperative behavior, and it's kind of like kindergarten. The more you give, the more you get. But that's not the way that a lot of our organizations or performance management culture or anything like that is done. And that's the significant shift that has to happen. So cooperation is not collaboration, but cooperation is the future, I think.
Well, let me pick up on that and riff a little bit on a question that was asked here. Apologies to the author. But what things should management not do if they want a culture of experimentation and a connected organization?
Can I start with one? Not force people to be social. Don't implement a social networking system or whatever and say, right, now you must be social. That just doesn't work. You can't force people to be social. That's one. I'm sure you've got one we can say at least.
Do you know anything about connected companies, Dave?
Yeah. You want to say?
Someone wrote a book about that, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I think the most important thing, and this is not necessarily something you should not do, but the thing to remember as a leader, that people watch your every move. If you had a bad morning or something in your breakfast tasted bad and you come in with a frown on your face, it's the weather report. for everyone in the organization. They don't know you had a bad blueberry in your breakfast. They're thinking, oh my God, there's a storm coming. Maybe the organization is in trouble. So I think it's very important for leaders to remember you are the weather report, and you are in a lot of ways, whatever you do with your behavior, even the smallest, most microscopic things like where you sit at the table, whether you let a phone call interrupt a meeting, whether you let some urgent thing take your attention away when you're in a conversation, all those things are really important. Whether you are tweeting yourself, how you handle it when someone calls you on your phone, how you react when you make a mistake. All those things are things that people are watching, and it's incredibly important to not have your walk not match your talk. That was a really complicated way of saying it. But I think you know what I mean.
I want to go back to the idea of the Trojan mice and what leaders need to do to encourage like a culture of experimentation, and especially when you're in an organization that, and a lot of nonprofits are like this, they're perfectionists, okay? We have to have 10 rewrites of the press release. We have to spend 20,000 hours producing God's annual report with the perfect picture, the perfect whatever, and long, complicated processes for approval, because we don't want anything bad to happen, and it has to be perfect. And when you try to shift that culture, you have to make it okay to satisfice. Okay, you know what satisfice? Satisfice is try not to be a perfectionist. Let's show the work early, release it early, and iterate on it. And again, to be and so leaders shouldn't call satisficing being a slacker, but they should actually look at that satisficing as a good behavior and reward it.
That's really tough when you have deadlines and deliverables. And I mean, if you go on my blog, it's called Life in Perpetual Beta, right? Because we're never going to get past beta. And if everybody remembers when Gmail came out, it was in beta for a number of years. The web world understands that, is that you build it, not alpha, right? Because alpha is what I call like a half-baked idea. It's beta, it's solid, it's based on principles, it works, but you're not going to know how it works in a complex environment until you actually test it out there. And guess what? It might fail. And the thing is, you have to have a culture of accepting the failure. So again, if the I is small enough, nobody cares if you fail. So you want to be doing lots of little things and trying them out, and then reinforcing the ones that are successful and taking resources away from the ones that aren't, and continuously trying that out. And I think it's kind of like the program that you work, the board here, so how many different iterations you went through on that.
It's kind of like how, and this comes from a book by Peter Sims called Little Bets. And it's how Chris Rock, we all know who Chris Rock is, how he develops the big comedy show for HBO. Like, he goes out and months ahead of time, he will go into the small comedy clubs in New Jersey where the ardent fans are, and he'll test all these jokes, and like, well, this one bombed, maybe I'll tweak it the next time. And, oh, this one worked, they laughed at that, let me develop it. And he will go out there and iterate in a low-stakes environment to get to the HBO special, which is the big stakes, having iterated and perfected his act.
Lots of people ask me how you do that in learning and development, and they say, we've got to get permission to do this. But if you call it a pilot project, you can do an awful lot. And you just try little things. That's how Harold and I do most of our work together. We try little projects, we do little workshops, push them out there. If they work, we carry on and feed off what we've done, improve it, and so forth. But we just try it small first. We don't make a big song and dance about it, do we, Harold? We do it small, and then we just kind of improve on it. And if it doesn't work, we retrench, and it's not a big deal. And I think that's really how lots of things need to...
We've retrenched a lot of things.
Yeah, and but it's good. It's been a good learning experience for us. But we need to know what works for us, and every organisation is different. There's no magic answer about way this is going to work for anybody. So you've just got to try things, and if you call them a project, a pilot, I found that usually works. It's other ways people call it as stealth projects and things like that. Do things under the radar.
And you're the folks who know the best of your organization. I'm a consultant, right, for a good chunk of my time, and no consultant understands the complex context of your organization. They can help you with guidelines and principles and stuff like that, but you're the ones who know it, and you're the ones who've got to say, or have to try the stuff out and see whether or not it works.
I'll riff on what you said about complexity, because I think, when you think about complex environments and you think about doing experiments, you think, okay, well, I'll do an experiment, and if that worked, then I'll do it again. But the thing about complex environments is just because something worked last time doesn't mean that it's going to work again, because complex environments respond and react to the things that you do. And a most stupid example is if you walk up to a person in the middle of the street and you punch them in the face, and they fall down, and you think, oh, that worked, and you come up to that same person again the next day, and you try it again, it's going to have a different reaction, right? They're going to see you coming, and they're going to react in a different way. And whether that's a positive or a negative thing, the thing about complex environments is that there are feedback loops, and there are ripples, and there's a lot of complexity to them, and it's not easy to design experiments that are going to be repeatable in a complex environment. In fact, you probably can't do it. So you need to recognize that there are, like you take Chris Rock, every time he goes to a different venue, it's a different audience, and he's got to account for that. And what he's doing is, he's not figuring out necessarily the perfect act. He's also practicing his ability to respond to a complex environment, and he's learning and getting better. And it's kind of like swimming, with sharks or with dolphins or something. The more you do it, though, the better you get at being responsive and able to respond to those complex environments. So the experiments are not necessarily, we're going to get better and better till we get perfect. The experiments are partly that you're going to learn things, or you're going to learn things that are repeatable, but they're also partly for you to be learning and building skills. And I think everyone up here would probably agree with me when I say that when we're in these social networks and these complex environments, a lot of it is skill building. It's not just like a scientific experiment that you do something and now you know what works. It's a lot of it is being able to build the muscle and skills that are required to be adaptive and responsive, be able to handle change.
Learning improv.
Yeah,
It's
improv.
learning because I think of a quote, and I can't remember who said it, but that if you're not making it up as you go along, then you're completely out of touch with reality. Because things are changing so much that so the skill is this adaptability and flexibility. And one of the things that I've tried to learn too, I've had plenty of failures. I don't even think it's an F word anymore. And so what I've had to learn how to do is if you think about a failure that you've had, whether at work or something personal, just think about that for a moment, okay? And I'm seeing people doing the bendy thing, like the gummy, and it's like there's this feeling of shame. So you have to start to understand what that feels like inside you, so you can move past that and get to the good stuff, which is the awesome learning that happens. So when something doesn't work, we have three typical reactions. We either blame someone else, it's their fault, it's your fault, it's your fault. Or we deny it, oh, what problem? It went wonderfully, it's fantastic. Or else we're just blaming ourselves. We're going in our head and saying, I'm a disease, I don't deserve to live, it's all my fault, I'm so awful. And so once you begin to understand internally how we react as human beings to failure, things not going right, then we can start to have empathy for other people and our organizations. And particularly if you're the leader, it's really crucial to understand that, to be able to get past this kind of awkwardness and bad feelings around things not working well, so you can get to the goal of learning from it.
There's a question on board thing about sort of success stories that around rewards and incentives. So the question is, are there any organizations that you can point out that have successfully developed recognition, reward, and advancement policies and processes that support a work environment based on collaborative teamwork rather than upon individual competition? It's a long question.
Yes, it's a long question, and in some ways I'd say no. I have real issues with gamification, big issues, because work is a game, and we don't need to layer a game on top of work. But there's a very good blog post that was put out a little while ago, and it was it's on mine. I'll tweet it out afterwards. But it's like the 18 bossless companies in the world. And they're the ones that you may have heard of. W.L. Gore and Associates are one of them, and Mondragon, which is a cooperative in Spain, and then there's a French company and a few other ones. Semco, the Brazilian company, where all meetings are voluntary, including the ones with the CEO. And so they've got that's the examples are there on how that works. And can you just do the last part of the question again, because I got to
Sure.
follow my own brain.
Okay, so that they've developed recognition, reward, and advancement policies and processes that support work environment based on collaborative teamwork rather than individual competition.
Right, so the thing is that it's the structure that actually brings out the innate humanity that we have. And so Dan Pink's book, Drive, where he talks about three things, autonomy, sense of purpose, and mastery. For the most part, if you give people that, we want to do well. I mean, anybody who was in kindergarten knows that, right? We want to do well. We want our peers to recognize us. We want to be contributors. We want to be seen as maybe not leaders, but as supportive and things like that. And you just need to have environments that actually tap into our humanity. And one of the wonderful things, there was a writer named Gwynne Dyer was talking about tyranny. And he said that, tyranny and autocracy were actually a response to a communications problem, because the leader couldn't communicate with everybody. We don't have that communications problem anymore. We don't need autocracy anymore. But we just don't know what to do with the new model. But there are at least 18 examples that are out there.
I agree with everything that Harold said, amazingly. But I think, really and he's right. I mean, people want to do good work. And the problem is that we're so risk averse generally in organizations that whenever one thing goes wrong, we try and do everything possible to make sure it doesn't go wrong again. And so we're building, it's kind of like we're building all these safety rails, and we've built up over many, many years. And this organization's over 100 years old, right? So, or 100. Anyway, you've probably built up so many safety rails to protect people from doing anything wrong and to make sure that we can't do anything that could possibly hurt anyone. The problem is that all those protective rails, and some of them being sort of policing type of activities or processes, they get in the way as much as they help. So every time it's kind of like, imagine a swimming pool that has barbed wire around it. No one can swim in it. No one's going to drown. Great, but you kind of lose the purpose of the swimming pool. And the point that I think is that most organizations need to realize is they have actually built up so much barbed wire and railings and stuff around people actually doing the stuff that they care about doing, that the most important action moving forward in most organizations is to start to take those guide rails away, just start to eliminate them. And you've got some risk involved in that, and it's important to communicate to stakeholders and boards and public people who have an interest in the organization that there's a reason why you're doing this, and you have to make sure that you're communicating that proactively. But I think most of those rails and walls are way overbuilt, and many of them have actually outlived the purpose. The reason that we put it up isn't even a problem anymore, but the rules there, I mean, how many people know of a rule in their organization? You don't have to raise your hand, we're on video, but how many people know of a rule that nobody knows why that we have the rule? I mean, there's a rule, you can't do that, but nobody can remember or explain or understand why. And there's a lot of those in organizations. And those are the things we need to start peeling away, asking why we have them.
Can I just say a bit about gamification? That I know it's used quite a lot in terms of communities to try and generate participation or better participation rates, but reward theory suggests, and I'm not an expert on reward theory, that you can bump it up at one point by gamifying the whole process, but after you've got that peak, it will drop down quite considerably afterwards. So you've got to have to keep repeating that gamification, and it's got to keep going further and further. So it's almost a no-win situation, I think. So it's better to build on the innate abilities and interests in the people rather than try and force that through gamification process. That's my opinion anyway.
Well, there's a more kind of tool-specific question here that I think is a pretty good question. Talking about email, is email the organization's biggest hurdle to preventing people connecting? A lot of complaints about email. You can do one sentence?
I'm going to do one sentence and then pass it on.
This better be a good one, Harold, if it's just one sentence.
Unfortunately, I'm not sure who actually the quote comes through, but it comes through Luis Suarez, who actually has inbox 0 or outside the inbox. And he's a new colleague of mine, quite happy to be working with him. But he says, he quotes, "Email is where knowledge goes to die."
I think as many organisations introducing enterprise social networks, that is beginning to wean people off their reliance on email. In fact, organisations are often trying to do so, and they're suggesting that perhaps on a daily basis, instead of sending an email, they use their enterprise social network to do it. So their reliance is on email, is the biggest hurdle, but I think with a bit of support they can actually begin to be weaned off it, but it probably is a gradual process, because I know for myself I still resort back to email very easily, so I think it's going to take time. It's not something you could quickly turn on and off, although I think some organisations have tried to do it, haven't they? They've tried to go completely non-email.
Luis gets like 2 emails a month, so it's not bad, and that was while he was working at IBM.
Whole organisations have tried to do it.
I haven't seen that. I've seen more like experiments saying, what if we tried an experiment with Yammer, which is sort of internal Twitter, to reduce the amount of conversational kinds of emails that we're sending along, sharing an article or something, and running that as a pilot and trying to get people to retrain their behavior from it.
And I know some gaming companies, particularly internet type gaming companies, and they have a policy that email is only allowed for official correspondence, right? So like with a client, or if it's a contract, a milestone, a deliverable, everything else goes on to text message or some type of a chat or the activity stream in a Yammer social cast kind of thing. So it's very clear cut that way.
Or having some sort of special tool right by your email box by the send button, and before you hit the send button, it comes up like Hootie Owl. Remember Hootie Owl? Do you really need to email pollute? Thinking of, excessive emails as pollution, it's toxic. So, and I always, like in my own work now think, do I really need to send this email? Do I really need to send this really long email? Can I answer this succinctly? Do I really need to check this email at midnight on a Friday and send this? Do I really need to respond to this email right in the moment? And if I do that, I'm creating a culture where the people I'm communicating with are going to, mimic that. And do I really want to perpetuate that?
I don't have a problem with email myself. But I do remember a friend of mine saying once he was a manager, manager at AT&T when they first brought in the photocopiers. So he's even older than me, and he was telling me how, I remember, we used to get a memo. You'd get a memo, and then there was photocopiers came along, and suddenly, everyone could get copied, and of course everybody wants to get copied, so at first. And then but that was even limited by the cost of paper and toner, right? And now what happens with email is that there's no cost to copying 1,000 people on your little email. That seems kind of innocuous and harmless, but so my thing would be similar to what Beth is saying, just, cool it on the CC part of it. If you have something to email somebody, there's nothing wrong with sending them a note, and even if it's a social thing. But just keep your trigger finger on the copy. Hold off and think. Is this going to actually help this person? Do they really need to be in the loop, or is this actually just going to be more cognitive overhead piling up on their
Or I love the technique of people of, I'm now moving Beth to BCCs to save her email box. I just think it's so great.
But email goes with also working transparently. So, one of the easiest ways to cut down email is that if your email is going to more than one person, then you should put it on the internal blog. Or you don't have an internal blog? Get one, right? And that now people, because then all the comments are on the blog thread. They're all in one place. So if you're the training manager or something like that, instead of sending stuff out to your group, you create an internal blog. and people can comment on it, and then someone can take a look at it afterwards, and there's a perma-link and all that kind of stuff. Really simple, and just, I mean, maybe you can talk to the tech people and get rid of the CC in the BCC field. that might help. Okay, is there a tech person around here? Yeah.
Here's a question about planning. In planning for the next 100 years of extension.
Easy question.
Dave will be around. That's
We're looking at potential needs that may exist in 2035 specifically, so they've shortened the timeline a little bit there. The goal is to become more proactive rather than reactive. How we're currently operating is reactive, according to this questioner. What advice, tips, et cetera, do you have for those of us who are part of this futuring process?
I'll start, I think.
You're holding the microphone.
I have the mic. I'm never giving it up. Of course, we don't know what the future is, right? But we do know that nature has certain principles, and the principles of diversity and that brings resilience. So that, because you don't know what's going to happen, you can't build a strong organization. You have to build a flexible organization. You have to build something that's resilient and able to change. So part of it is we know we're going to have to change. We should practice changing. And let's change more, and let's get better at changing. Let's get better at shifting things. And I think that that's the only thing that can really, it's the tree that bends over as opposed to the tree that breaks, right? We have to be very flexible. I don't know, 100 years from now I'll be dead. I'm assuming.
Perhaps proactivity is about being reactive, as you say, you've got to be flexible enough to react and be proactive in your reaction. That makes sense, but I don't think you can plan for 10 years ahead, let alone 5 years ahead, let alone 100 years ahead. So,
Or even 3 years.
yes, I think it's just impossible. You've just got to keep the perpetual beta, keep it going. Think how long in advance do you think you could think?
I'm going to be contrarian here.
Okay.
One of my poster children for being an adaptive organization is Amazon, and one of the things Jeff Bezos says is that one of the advantages that Amazon has is that they can take a long view, that they do think 5 to 7 years ahead, and they can actually invest in things that may not actually come to fruition for 5 to 7 years. And he says, and I agree with him, this gives them a major advantage over almost every other company, because most companies are managing quarter to quarter, trying to show profit, whereas Amazon can invest in things that they have no idea if they're going to be profitable. They can put money towards things that they believe. And they might have 3 to 5 of these big, more long-term visionary things that they're working on. Kindle would be one. Another one was when they opened up their infrastructure to sell it as a service, the Amazon Web Services. Is something going on over there?
No, sorry, go ahead, Dave.
Okay.
I was just trying to distract you. Did it work? It worked. Okay, good.
No, but I mean, so at the same time, but how do they know to make what big bets to make? I think that's part of this adaptive thing. The way they know it is that they've got constantly little experiments going on all the time, small ones that they're feeding and they're making it possible. And they, if someone wants to actually try an experiment, it's very easy at Amazon to form a small team and just actually start working on something that is got a lot of big ifs. But they don't invest a lot of money in those small experiments. But they have enough of them going on. Let's say there's something like the idea of letting 1,000 flowers bloom, right? There's 1,000 of these things going on, and from those 1,000, they can pick 100 to give a little bit more investment to. And then out of those 100, they look at the ones that really seem really interesting in long term, like we're going to build a spaceship or whatever it is, and those are the ones that they can make the long-term bets on. And one other concept that I also is related to Amazon comes from a guy named Stuart Brand that comes from architecture. The idea is pace layering. Things don't all change at the same rate. So yes, there's going to be a lot of change, but some things, so for example, an Amazon warehouse is the whole logistics and mail system, the system by which a package gets from a warehouse to your door is not going to change as fast as how you might order things on the web or how customers are going to do reviews on the internet. And so the idea of understanding the rate of change in various environments is really important. The things that you know are going to change really, really slowly. I can predict in 2035 we're not going to be driving on the left side of the road in America. We're just not. I can predict that. It's not going to change. If it changes, it's not going to change by 2035. Maybe the roads will go away, but we'll still be on the left side of whatever it is we're driving on. And maybe we won't even be driving, but the cars will be on the left side of the road. And I think it's important to think.
Why?
I'm not going to predict. But the point being, think not only about change, but think about the different rates at which things change. The internet's going to be radically different, but some things are going to change very slowly. And I think that those are the things you want to, you hook your anchors into when you think about how you do your long-term planning.
Mm-hmm. I think we have some audience questions. Sarah, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, and I would say in part to people who have jobs like mine, but we have in general, a real culture of accountability, and I think that stymies the ability for the boots on the ground folks to feel like they can fail. So I'm wondering if you all can speak a little bit to sort of building a culture where it's okay to fail and it's okay to put on your report that you tried this and it didn't work.
Go ahead, Beth.
I'm just thinking of a couple of examples that we brought up in the session, and these are more tactical. And of course, leadership has to be behind it. I mean, again, they have to model that change, but I'm thinking about do something. In their organization, they have a quarterly fail fest, and actually the CEO did it first. You dress up in a pink boa, and you bring a campaign, and you talk about why it didn't work. And so it takes the stigma and the shame out of the failure. Another organization, Moms Rising, which is a group of mom bloggers who want to make the USA a more family-friendly place. They do something called the Joyful Funeral. So it's they give each other permission not to do a technique that didn't work, and they actually bring it up on staff, and it starts with, oh, is it time for us to do a joyful funeral? No, let's order the flowers. And then they do a eulogy, and from that reflection comes, something else to try, or it helps them flex their adaptability muscle, if there is such a thing. Another organization, Global Giving, it's a giving site, and they have something called The Biggest Loser. So every quarter, one person on staff will bring a campaign they did that just didn't, make their goal, and it was the biggest loser. So it's kind of like having the CEO behind it and having a sort of fun, low risk, low shame way to talk about things that didn't work.
I think it goes back to my idea of the pilot, because if you word the pilot properly, then the idea is to test something out. And so that if you fail, you've tested it out and it failed. So there's no big problem. You've actually achieved your objectives of your pilot. So that's the way to actually minimize risk. If you set yourself up for failure, and then failure is a big thing in your organization, then it will cost you. But if you set yourself up to test something out and you fail, then you've achieved what you set out to do.
I was talking to a guy named Dave Snowden. Some of you may have heard of him. I'm doing some research on my new book. Not the one who was the NSA guy who is another one. That's Edward Snowden. Dave Snowden is sort of this former IBM guy who's done a lot of research into reacting and being smart in complex environments. And one of the things he said was that he talked about an organization that he had been working with where they, from a management perspective, the expectation was that at least 30% of your experiments would fail or you're not trying hard enough. And what was funny about this to me is, so what happened was some of the managers were like, okay, I'm going to pick one intentionally to fail just so I meet my numbers. And, but what would happen is, I'm going to give that crazy guy some money because I think that's the stupidest idea I ever heard of, and then they would succeed wildly. And so there's something to be said for this. Beth, you were talking before today in your panel about, 30% of your time should be spent on actually gathering the data, and another 70% should be spent thinking about what you gathered. I think there's something to be said for a kind of rules of thumb about ratios. If none of your experiments fail, you're not experimenting. I mean, come on. You're kind of just sandbagging. So, from an organizational kind of portfolio perspective, imagine a venture capitalist where every single company, IPO'd. They probably weren't really, experimenting in there. They probably don't really have a very diverse portfolio, and they're probably not going to get big returns either.
Yeah, we can go to a question. Yeah. Go ahead.
Thanks. So you've talked quite a lot about how management and administration can help create a culture more forgiving of failing and experimentation. But in extension, we also have another clientele, many of whom have been with us for 100 years and generations, that very much like or may like the way things are exactly now. How does the culture expand to the clientele in terms of being accepting of experimentation and occasional failure?
So these people are over 100 years old? What kind of clients do you have?
Some of them are. You need to go to the 4-H Volunteer Awards, and most of us have some that have been at least for 60 or 70 years. They may be, or generations, that they've been in the program for multiple generations.
Well, my advice is you have to pick the right projects and the right target audience to start with. You don't go out and try and convince those who are really going to be against it. You find the right people. You start small with the right audience, the ones who want to change or thinking about it or perhaps accepting it, thinking about what might happen. You don't go out and bang your head against a brick wall, but the people are really averse to it. So you've got to win the right battles. I've learned that the hard way, I tell you. You find the right places to have your battles, but you don't, otherwise it hurts, I tell you.
I think the other thing is that being prepared yourself is that if you see some changes as being inevitable or coming, and that we need to we should be working more transparently with our customers, but they don't want to work transparently. I think the first thing is that you have to be a model of the behavior, and so that you have to develop the skills. I mean, this is how startups kill incumbents, right? They develop what's known as asymmetrical skills. They develop skills in an area that the incumbents don't have. And so you need to do that. You need to model it, and then you need to wait for the opportunities. When something presents itself, say, "Oh, that didn't work. Here's something we've been doing here. Take a look at this and try this out." But if you haven't been doing it for a while, you're not ready to do that. So be the change first, but then don't try to evangelize it. Just be ready when the opportunity comes.
Public organizations and governments have different kinds of responsibilities than companies. I mean, when you're a company, you can say, "These are my customers. We're going to go after these customers, and that's who we care about." If you're if you're in charge of governing a city, you have to actually consider everyone. And I think you, as a group, you're perhaps in that category where you have to consider people, the whole your populations that you serve holistically. But there's always a balance, right? And I'm going to actually come out somewhat in favor of gamification, maybe, or something like it. But I know there's a guy that I know called Luke Holman who runs a company called Innovation Games. And one of the things is that you are doing, that you're struggling with, is you've got limited resources and you've got a lot of things that you want to do, more than you can do. You have to prioritize. And there are ways to invite your stakeholders into that process of helping you prioritize the things that you want to do. And this is why we have votes, because not everyone always gets their way, and that's why we have things like elections and voting. And the thing that Luke Holman did that I thought was really interesting is he got the whole city of San Jose, or not the whole city, but for the city of San Jose, he ran something I think he called budget games, where they actually had people working in small groups. And they actually had all the things that all the citizens wanted to do. I don't know, I wasn't there, so on cards or something. But they designed a game around, okay, this is the budget. This is how much money you have. How are you going to spend it? Here's all the things that everybody wants. And they had a bunch of people, a whole bunch of people from the city playing this kind of Monopoly type of game. And they were able to collate the results of that up into really helping policymakers make good decisions about how should we apportion these resources, because we're actually asking the people to simulate the situation that the policymakers are in about how to distribute scarce and unlimited resources. I mean, if you ask people in the United States who wants to live in a beach house, well, everybody's going to want to live in a beach house, but there's only so much beach, right? I mean, so you got to think about to create you want to try and create situations where people can think holistically, both inside the organization, because it's easy to get dragged down in the details and the weeds, right? But also outside the organization and bring them in. And this is what co-creation and participatory design is about. You put those constraints and resources and things on a table, and whether it's with sticky notes or other kinds of rules, and maybe this, I don't know if gamification is the term for it, but you find ways for people to actually understand the dynamics of the system and help you make decisions.
It's like having empathy too. So we think about, I'm thinking about a lot of social change entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, who may have a lot of arrogance and say, and they're visionary, so they have this great application that's going to, save all the whales or do this, and they go out and they find out that didn't work, and then they start to talk to the people that the users of this program or this great idea, and they begin to develop a sense of empathy, and then comes the pivot. And so I think sometimes it's like, if we're designing for people, or if we're trying to build a program for people, have we asked those? Have we engaged with them? Do we understand their point of view? Both inside and outside.
John, go ahead.
So there was a lot of discussion around running pilots, running experiments, doing things like that. Can you offer a framework for extension which has multiple separated things to do what I call portfolio management of ideas or innovation ideas or experiments?
I got this from Dave Snowden, so it's not mine, but I'm going to give something that he said to me that really resonated with me is you should run experiments where they disagree with each other, so they're directly contradictory. So if one experiment is right, the other one has to be wrong. And the reason for doing that is to make sure that you get enough of a spread and that you're actually experimenting. You want to make sure that you have hypotheses that disagree with each other, and you run these experiments in parallel because you know that you don't know everything. So that's, I don't know if I can explain it further than that, but I think to me that was a very interesting insight, that as you look at your portfolio of experiments, you have more.
Well, actually, it really went to the point of if everybody ran experiments, who's actually saying that's the one we actually kill and that's the one we actually start with? So you're saying balance them, so the one that fails, the other one's got to succeed, kill the one that failed. How do you manage that across 70 different units?
How do you manage a portfolio?
Well, I think there's multiple ways. I mean, one is, of course, having a control mechanism in place, but the other one, again, the notion of transparency and narration working out loud, is that if everybody is publishing their results internally, then everybody's going to know what's going on. It's kind of like on the internet, is that how do I know what's happening with all the bloggers as I go read their blogs? Well, why? Because they blog. I think the same thing. So if you're going to do an experiment, write about your experiment. But I mean, there might be some other ones.
I have one working in an organization now. That it started with, it started off with, we need to have a better way to measure impact because it's a digital, they do digital content around social change. So, and we're only really looking at reach, but that's not really impact. We need to look at how is our content inspiring behavior change, and how are we inspiring champions that can talk to others about this behavior change. So we went through kind of a design thinking process on how we're going to redesign the dashboard in the organization, using some techniques from Luma Institute, and I just tweeted out the link. And what came out when we were sitting, instead of jumping into the solution of we got to fix this problem, we actually sat with the whole, issue of what is the organization's current measurement process, what's the culture around measurement, what's the culture around failure, and what is our process for developing this content. And a lot of things kind of popped out beyond just impact measures. And so one of the themes that kind of surfaced was, well, we need to be more agile, where we need to learn how to satisfice. And what if we set up experiments where we're spending less time in this particular process, and can we still get the same impact results? And so now they're at this point where they're working in teams, and they've set up and loosely based on design thinking, where they're doing these short-term experiments. Some of them are actually competing. Some of them have competing hypotheses. But it's a process of developing them together, and then sharing the results, and then thinking through the next set of experiments. And this is with an organization of about maybe 40 people.
Just add one quick thing here is that Adam Kahane, who worked on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, he helped design it in South Africa. Interesting insight in working on really complex problems, in that he said that a lot of these, if you just leave them alone, they will resolve themselves. So that's also always something to think of, that maybe it doesn't need to be cured.
How many consultants does it take to change a life? No.
At least one.
I'd like to add another thought on experimentation, because you are an outcome-oriented organization, and one of the key elements of any experiment is that you can't know the outcome. And if you look at the history of science and advances in science, many of the most amazing discoveries were accidental discoveries. They weren't even realized at the time. I don't think that it always has to be about outcomes. I think that it's important to know what the outcomes are that you want and the things that you want. But I think it's also important to this idea of letting 1,000 flowers bloom. Let people play a little bit. You want to trust that people know the job, that they know the mission, that they know what they're trying to do, that they're going to learn as they start to experiment, that they're going to learn from that. A lot of companies have these innovation funnel, and the idea is you got a funnel, and you try and collect ideas from the organization, and then the funnel is going to be really good at killing 99% of the ideas. And what happens in these cases is nothing goes into the funnel because nobody wants their idea to get killed. Because it's like buying a lottery ticket, you know. And in order to even get your idea in the funnel, you got to fill out a spreadsheet and predict the future of in 2035 what's going to be the outcome. And I think the idea of letting 1,000 flowers bloom is, instead of building this giant idea-killing funnel and forcing people to make giant spreadsheet predictions before they can even put their idea in the funnel to get killed, think of it from a completely different perspective. Let people spend that time actually making things instead of planning and predicting things, which doesn't get anybody. You never learn from a prediction. You don't learn anything from making a spreadsheet. You learn from actually making something and trying it and putting it into the world and seeing what happens. That's how you actually innovate things. No one could. Who invented penicillin? Was it Salk? All right. Well, Salk wasn't looking for penicillin. It was mold that grew on something, I think. Right? Okay. You have to actually do something in order to discover something. You can't discover things by making spreadsheets and plans. I'm not saying you should stop focusing on outcomes as an organization, but what I am saying is let those 1,000 flowers bloom. Give people, let people make some space in their day to try things instead of trying to plan and predict everything. That's the culture of experimentation. That's what it means. People are experimenting, not predicting experiments, outcomes.
Unfortunately, we are.
Can I ask one more question? I promised. It's from the outside audience.
Karen promised
Okay.
streaming staff, so.
All right, thank you. And he actually had one too. But while we are opening up to using a variety of means for communicating and collaborating, one of the things I see as limiting extension and e-extension is its perception of what constitutes valid knowledge, where it comes from, and how it's created. Do you see this as a problem? And if so, how can we shift our culture?
Well, the internet's sort of blasting all that apart in terms of expertise and what knowledge is, and you're dealing with it like every other organization is dealing with it, because expertise was in organizations and we're getting a lot more knowledge and things that are happening outside, which happened before, but it's like hyperlink subvert hierarchy according to the clue train, right? I think it's just something that we're going to deal with, that your organization is going to have to deal with like all others. I'll be short in case. I don't know.
Okay.
That was very valid.
That was valid. We all agree with that.
I have validity and I have reliability, so I'm good, okay?
Well, thanks for all the questions on our online audience and here in the room, and thanks to our panelists. Let's give them a round of applause, please. And I have gifts, coasters, so as you're enjoying beverages later, make sure that you use your coasters. All right, thanks everybody, and thanks everyone online.